My uncle physically blocked me from entering Thanksgiving dinner and told me I wasn't family anymore. But what he didn't know was that I'd been secretly recording every cruel thing they said about me for months. My name is Marcus, and I'm 28 years old. For my entire life, I've been the invisible son in a family that treated me like a living ghost. You know the type, the one who gets forgotten on group texts, cropped out of family photos, and only remembered when they need someone to drive them around or lend them money. I lived with a mother who had a razor-sharp tongue and the memory of an elephant, but only for my failures. She could recall every single mistake I'd ever made with photographic detail, but somehow forgot every achievement, every time I helped her out of a jam, every birthday card I scraped together money to buy her. My sister Isabella figured out early that being the perfect little princess got her everything she wanted. She smiled on command, never questioned authority, pulled straight A's, and got treated like actual royalty in our house. I was her complete opposite. Quiet, questioning, brutally honest when everyone wanted pretty lies. That didn't mesh well with our family's toxic culture, where fake smiles were treated like currency and speaking the truth was considered a personal attack. For years, I broke my back trying to earn my place at their table. I'd show up to family dinners I was never officially invited to, bearing expensive pies I couldn't afford. I brought thoughtful gifts to birthday parties where no one even acknowledged when I walked through the door. I gave fake compliments to relatives who couldn't even be bothered to pronounce my name correctly. At first, I genuinely believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I was good enough, they'd eventually see my worth. But by age 25, the brutal truth finally hit me like a freight train. Nothing I did would ever be enough. My seat at their table was never going to be permanent. It was always conditional, always temporary, always ready to be given away to someone they actually valued. Still, there's a special kind of heartache that logic can't cure, no matter how clearly you understand the situation. So when Thanksgiving rolled around last year, I seriously considered skipping it entirely. But there was one person who made me reconsider, my cousin Riley. She was the only human being in our entire twisted family tree who treated me like I actually mattered, 2 years younger than me, but emotionally light years ahead of the supposed adults in our family. Over the years, Riley and I had grown incredibly close through late-night DMs, honest phone calls at 2 a.m., and real conversations about how messed up our family really was. The day before Thanksgiving, she texted me something that melted my resolve. "You better show up tomorrow. I already saved you a spot, and I mean it." So, against my better judgment, I caved. I figured that maybe, just maybe, showing up for Riley would be worth enduring another round of family torture. I drove 40 minutes through suburban hell to reach my uncle's house, where every Thanksgiving had been hosted for the past decade. Classic white picket fence neighborhood, perfectly manicured lawn, tacky inflatable turkey wobbling in the autumn wind, and that unmistakable smell of butter, herbs, and family dysfunction wafting through the Minzor. I parked 3 houses down the street, like always, because Uncle Derek's driveway was permanently reserved for the family members who actually mattered. As I walked up those familiar front steps, clutching a bottle of wine that I knew would sit untouched all evening, I could see them through the screen door. My mother, my aunt, Isabella, Uncle Derek, all of them laughing and chatting like they were posing for some twisted Norman Rockwell painting. I wasn't expecting a red carpet welcome or even a simple hello, but what happened next wasn't just cold, it was calculated cruelty. As I reached for the doorknob, ready to paste on my fake family smile, the door cracked open just wide enough for Uncle Derek to fill the entire frame like a human barricade. No greeting, no smile, just that smug little smirk that I'd learned to hate over the years. "You're not family anymore, Marcus," he said, with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. "You need to leave, now." At first, I actually laughed because I thought he was making some kind of sick joke. I waited for the punchline, for someone to call him out, for literally anything that resembled normal human decency. But he didn't budge an inch. Behind him, I watched my mother casually hand 2 dinner plates across the table, and one of them had my place card on it, the one with my name written in my aunt's careful handwriting. She passed it to Isabella's boyfriend with a laugh. this guy I'd maybe spoken to twice in my entire life. They clinked their wine glasses together in celebration. My chair, my spot, my place at the family table was being filled before I'd even set foot in the house. "I'm dead serious," Uncle Derek added, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You showing up here just creates drama and tension for everyone. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Just go home, okay?" I looked over his shoulder and locked eyes with my mother. She didn't flinch, didn't tell him to back off, didn't defend me. She just raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow and took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine like she was watching a mildly entertaining reality TV show. For a split second, I considered fighting back, raising my voice, demanding answers, making the kind of scene that would at least force them to acknowledge my existence. But instead, I did something that surprised even me. I nodded quietly, stepped backward down those steps, and walked to my car with that same bottle of wine still clutched in my hand. I drove exactly 2 blocks before pulling over because my hands were shaking, not with rage, but with something much colder and more final. I'd just seen everything I needed to see. I wasn't family to them. I was a placeholder, a convenient target for their cruelty, a scapegoat when they needed someone to blame for their problems, and an empty chair when they needed more space for people they actually cared about. But here's the thing. They didn't know. I had been preparing for this exact moment for months. You see, Riley and I had talked about this possibility more than once during our whispered late-night conversations. She wasn't as vocal about it as me, but she saw the favoritism, the manipulation, the psychological games that happened at every single family gathering. She once told me, if we ever wanted to shatter their perfect little illusion, all it would take is one tiny spark. So I picked up my phone and opened the message I'd been crafting for weeks. It wasn't an angry rant or some desperate plea for attention. It wasn't a guilt trip or a long-winded attempt at closure. It was something much more powerful. It was the truth, laid bare and undeniable, sent to a very carefully selected group of people who were sitting in that house right now. 5 minutes later, as I sat in my car at the corner of their perfect suburban street with my engine idling, I watched the chaos unfold in my rearview mirror. The front door burst open like a dam had broken. First came Riley, her face bright red with fury. Then my cousin Jake, followed by his girlfriend. Then my aunt's best friend, the sweet woman who always brought homemade desserts and had always been kind to me. One by one, they stormed out of that house. I couldn't hear the shouting and arguments happening inside, but I could see the anger, the shock, the realization dawning on their faces. The perfect family facade was crumbling in real time. And this was just the beginning. Riley was the first person to call me. Her name lit up my phone screen before I'd even pulled away from the curb. "Marcus," she snapped the moment I picked up, not bothering with pleasantries. "What the hell did you just do in there?" I paused for a second. "You read it, didn't you?" "Of course I read it." So did everyone else. Uncle Derek's face turned purple. "Your mom tried to play dumb and pretend she didn't know what was happening, and Isabella just stood there frozen like a deer in headlights." I could hear wind rushing past her phone. She was walking fast, probably pacing around the yard or heading to her car. Riley went quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me you were recording them?" And that, right there, was the key to everything. A few months earlier, after years of being talked down to, dismissed, gaslit, and lied about behind my back, I'd started collecting evidence. Not because I was paranoid or crazy, but because I was exhausted from being told I was imagining things, overreacting, or twisting their words. I'd started recording casual conversations, saving text message screenshots, documenting every cruel comment. I had video footage of my mother telling Isabella to take credit for a project I'd completed. I had a voice recording of Uncle Derek saying, I only showed up to family events looking for handouts, even though I'd never asked them for a single thing in my life. But the worst piece of evidence was an audio recording from my own birthday the year before. They'd literally forgotten I existed while I was sitting right there at the table with them. The Thanksgiving message I'd just sent wasn't just a text, it was a carefully edited compilation of their greatest hits. 5 minutes of pure family hypocrisy, complete with context, timestamps, and just enough dead silence between each cruel comment to let the weight of their words really sink in. I'd sent this compilation to 7 specific people: Riley, Jake, my Aunt Carmen, my cousin's fiancé, my mother's sister who'd always been on the fence about our family's dynamics, and 2 close family friends who'd always believed the sanitized version of our family that my mother and Uncle Derek sold to the world like it was gospel truth. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you caught in the crossfire," I said quietly into the phone. Riley let out a bitter laugh. "I'm already in the crossfire, Marcus, but I'm glad you finally did something about it." I felt my grip on the steering wheel finally start to loosen. "Are you okay?" "I will be. I'm done with all of them." Click. I sat there in the silence of my car, staring out the windshield as more and more cars began pulling away from the house. A few confused relatives stood on the front porch, trying to figure out what had just happened. My mother's voice rose above all the chaos, shouting something I couldn't quite make out, but I didn't need to hear the specific words. I'd been listening to variations of that same angry speech my entire life. The next call came from Aunt Carmen. "Marcus," she said, completely breathless. "Where are you right now?" I considered lying, but what was the point? "Down the street." "Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming to find you." She hung up without another word, and true to her promise, 5 minutes later she was climbing into my passenger seat. Her eyes were wide with shock, but not anger. More like someone who had just stumbled into a crime scene they weren't prepared to witness. "I listened to everything," she said twice, like she was trying to convince herself it was real. I stayed silent. "I never knew it was that bad, Marcus. I mean, I knew they could be cruel sometimes, but I had no idea how calculated and deliberate it all was." I looked over at her. "You really had no clue." She winced like I'd slapped her. "I saw pieces of it, but your mother always made it seem like you were the real problem. She'd tell me you were being dramatic, that you twisted situations to make yourself look like the victim. I didn't want to believe she was capable of lying like that." "She wasn't technically lying," I said softly. "She was just editing the truth until it fit her narrative." Aunt Carmen stared at the dashboard in stunned silence. "This is going to completely destroy our family." "Maybe," I replied. "But maybe it was already broken, and we were all just pretending otherwise." That evening, I went home to discover my phone had blown up with messages. Some were angry, some were apologetic, and a few were completely confused. But what stood out most was the deafening silence from the people who should have been reaching out: my mother, Isabella, and Uncle Derek. Not one phone call, not one text message, not a single word of acknowledgement. That silence lasted until the next morning, when I discovered the Facebook post. My mother, in her usual performative style, had written a long, carefully crafted status about betrayal, family misunderstandings, and private matters being aired publicly for attention. She never mentioned my name directly, but the comments made it crystal clear who she was talking about. Her friends offered sympathy and support, calling me disrespectful and ungrateful, saying things like, "You raised him better than that," and "Some children just don't appreciate what they have." But then something beautiful and unexpected started happening in that comment thread. Riley commented first, then Jake, then Aunt Carmen. One by one, people began pushing back against the narrative. They called out the manipulation, the double standards, the gaslighting. Some even started sharing their own stories of being mistreated or lied to by my mother and uncle. The comment thread exploded into chaos. Some relatives deleted their comments and disappeared. A few blocked me entirely. But the tide had shifted permanently. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone against their lies. People were finally seeing the truth, and they weren't staying quiet about it anymore. That weekend, I received a message request from Isabella's boyfriend, the same guy who'd been sitting in my chair at Thanksgiving dinner. His message was short, but powerful. I had no idea they were like that behind closed doors. I'm sorry for what happened. If I'd known what I was participating in, I never would have taken your seat at that table. I didn't respond because I didn't need to. The message had already been sent, and I don't just mean the one he wrote to me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own life story. I felt like the author finally taking control of the narrative, and I knew this story was far from over. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I live in a quiet part of town. Nothing fancy, just a small place above a bakery that fills my mornings with the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls. It's peaceful and calm, the complete opposite of the house I grew up in, where every door slam felt like a gunshot and every family dinner was a performance staged for the neighbors' benefit. I wasn't expecting visitors. Most of my friends had already texted me after the recording went viral in our social circle, some supportive, others shocked by what they'd heard. Riley had been calling me every single day to check in, but I definitely wasn't prepared to open my door and find my father standing there. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. He looked older than I remembered, with more gray creeping into his beard, and his familiar leather jacket looking more worn and weathered. He didn't smile, just stood there with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey," he finally muttered awkwardly. "Didn't expect to see you," I said, stepping aside but not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. He hesitated for a moment, then walked inside. I watched him scan my apartment. Clean, quiet, filled with small things that actually brought me joy. Books I finally had time to read. Records I could play without judgment. There was even a framed photo of Riley and me from the one Thanksgiving we'd snuck out and grabbed burgers instead of dealing with the family circus. "I saw the recording," he said finally. "Well, parts of it. Your aunt sent it to me." I waited for him to continue. He sat down heavily on the edge of my couch, staring at the floor. "Your mother has been losing her mind over this whole situation. She keeps saying you set her up, that you twisted everything to make her look bad." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Did I?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rubbed the bridge of his nose like he was trying to massage away years of tension and regret. "I don't know, Marcus. I knew things were bad between you two. But hearing it all laid out like that, it was hard to listen to." I crossed my arms. "Hard for who?" He finally looked up at me. "For me." Because it made me realize I let it happen for years, without saying a word. And there it was. The first genuinely honest thing my father had ever said to me. It felt like looking into a mirror instead of talking to a wall. I didn't trust myself to speak yet, so I just waited. He shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Do you remember when you were 13 and your mother threw away your entire art portfolio?" The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. Months of work, gone in one afternoon. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She told me you'd drawn something disrespectful about the family." I drew one cartoon of her yelling at me. That was literally it. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I believed her story without question, never even asked to see your artwork myself." "That was the pattern," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She'd say something, you'd nod and go along with it. Isabella would play her part perfectly, and I'd be left wondering if I was crazy or just not worth the truth." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words never came. Instead, he just sat there, nodding slightly, letting the heavy silence stretch between us. "I can't go back and fix what already happened," he said eventually, "but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I understand what you went through. I wish I'd spoken up sooner. I wish I'd protected you. I believed he meant every word, I really did." But part of me also understood that his regret couldn't undo decades of complicity. He hadn't been actively cruel like my mother, but he'd been silent when I needed him most, and sometimes silence cuts just as deep as any insult. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him honestly, "but I'm not sure what you want from me now." He exhaled slowly. "I don't know either. I guess I just wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm doing better," I said, and it was the truth. Now that I'm out of that toxic environment, now that I've stopped pretending they'll magically change into different people, he nodded again. They're planning some kind of damage control strategy. Of course they are. They think if they just wait long enough, people will move on and forget about this. I raised an eyebrow. And will they? He looked exhausted. Some already have. Some people are too scared to pick sides in family drama, but others are furious, especially about what you revealed regarding the money. Ah, yes, the money. That was the part that had really stung them where it hurt most. What I hadn't mentioned to anyone outside of that original message was the financial trail I'd been leaving behind for years. I'd been quietly providing support to several family members, rent money, car repairs, even a $3,000 loan to Isabella when she claimed she needed to escape an abusive relationship. I never asked for repayment, never made a big deal about it. I did it because I thought maybe, just maybe, it would finally earn me a permanent place in their hearts. That financial support had stopped 3 months ago. I didn't make any dramatic announcements or threats. I just quietly redirected that money toward Riley, toward real friends, toward people who actually treated me like a human being worth caring about. The recording I'd sent included a note at the very end. This is exactly why I stopped funding your lives. Apparently, that financial reality check had stung them even more than hearing their own cruel words played back. They're saying you're punishing them financially, my dad said. They punish themselves, I replied calmly. I just stopped rewarding their behavior. He couldn't argue with that logic. After a while, he stood up to leave. I should go. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. He started walking toward the door, then paused and turned back. If there's ever a way for us to rebuild our relationship, I hope you'll give me that chance. Then he left. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood there in the quiet of my apartment, wondering how long it would take for the next wave of family drama to crash over me, because I knew my mother well enough to know she wasn't done fighting yet. She never let go of power easily, and Isabella had never learned how to handle public humiliation. Thanksgiving might have been the spark that started this fire, but Christmas was coming fast, and if they thought they could just pretend nothing had changed, they were about to get a very expensive wake-up call. I was just getting started. By December, the silence in our family group chat was absolutely deafening. The thread that usually exploded with Christmas planning, potluck assignments, and recycled memes from Aunt Margaret was eerily quiet. The last message came from Riley. Let me know when you're all ready to take some real accountability for your actions. No responses, no laughing emoji reactions, no snide remarks, just guilt masquerading as peace. I wasn't invited to Christmas, obviously, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing out on something important. I didn't have to force fake smiles through another dinner where Isabella's mediocre career got celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize while mine was completely ignored. I didn't have to listen to my mother's passive-aggressive jokes at my expense. I was finally free from obligation, free from false expectations, free from the crushing weight of being the family's designated emotional punching bag. But I wasn't finished with them yet. The recording I'd sent at Thanksgiving had shaken their carefully constructed image and forced some uncomfortable conversations, but it hadn't actually made them change their behavior. They were just hiding now, licking their wounds, waiting for the scandal to blow over. I could feel their smug confidence that eventually I'd fade from everyone's memory and they'd be able to reclaim their false narrative. So I decided to make sure that could never happen. I started with the money, quietly, methodically, and without any warning. That $3,000 loan to Isabella got called in with a formal letter from my lawyer. I reminded her that while I'd originally treated it as a gift, her recent lies about escaping an abusive relationship had voided that understanding. She was still with that same boyfriend, by the way. He'd been the one laughing in my chair at Thanksgiving dinner. I gave her 60 days to repay in full. No interest, no threats, just a paper trail that made everything official. I canceled the recurring bank transfer that had been covering Uncle Derek's property taxes. He'd never directly asked for help, too proud for that, but years ago, he'd hinted about financial struggles, and I'd quietly stepped in to help. Every November for the past 5 years, like clockwork, I'd sent the exact amount he needed. Not this year. On December 3rd, his bank declined the automatic payment, but my mother was the biggest shock of all. For 5 solid years, I'd been covering the lease payments on her car. She'd never thanked me, not even once. It was just expected, like breathing. She'd made it clear that as her son, supporting her was simply my duty as family. I'd let it slide for far too long. What she didn't know was that the car lease was still in my name. On December 10th, I had it repossessed. The phone calls came in like fireworks on New Year's Eve. First, Isabella, shrill and furious, screaming about betrayal and family loyalty. Then, Uncle Derek, trying to reason with me like I was some angry child throwing a tantrum. And finally, my mother. She didn't yell or cry or beg. She just called and said in the coldest voice I'd ever heard, "So this is who you really are, underneath it all." "No," I replied calmly. "This is who you made me become." Click. Christmas Eve arrived, and I didn't spend it alone. I celebrated with Riley and a small group of mutual friends in her cozy apartment. We cooked dinner together, lit candles, played board games, and exchanged gifts that didn't need to impress anyone or prove our worth. It was the warmest, most genuine holiday I'd experienced in years. Around midnight, Riley poured us each a glass of wine and curled up next to me on the floor, pulling a soft blanket over our legs. "They called me earlier," she said quietly. "Let me guess," I said. "Damage control?" She nodded. "Your mom said I was choosing sides, that I was actively tearing the family apart." "You are," I said with a smile. "You're tearing down the part that needed to be destroyed." She leaned her head against my shoulder. She also said something else. That she's planning to set the record straight publicly. I sighed. Of course she is. The next morning, I discovered exactly what she'd meant. My mother had written another long, carefully crafted Facebook post, another performance, another desperate attempt to flip the script and control the narrative. She talked about how families go through difficult seasons, how private pain sometimes becomes public, and how some family members can be manipulated by false stories. It was a masterclass in polished denial. No names mentioned, no specific details, just enough vague language to generate sympathy from people who only knew the sanitized version of our family that she'd been selling for decades. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't need to, because by then the truth was spreading faster than her lies. Aunt Carmen posted her own status, short but devastatingly pointed. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken family is to stop pretending it isn't broken. Proud of you, Marcus. Jake posted a screenshot of text messages my mother had sent him years earlier, bad-mouthing me right after I'd helped pay for his college textbooks. His caption was simple but powerful. We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to admit it. More and more people started speaking up, cousins I hadn't talked to in years, old family friends, even one of Isabella's college roommates. They were apologizing, sharing their own stories, admitting they'd noticed the dysfunction but hadn't known how deep it went. It was like lifting the lid off a pressure cooker that had been building steam for decades. Everyone had their own stories of mistreatment. Everyone carried their own scars from our family's toxic dynamics. And suddenly, they weren't afraid to share those experiences anymore. A week after Christmas, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a threat. She wrote that I was destroying our family's reputation, that I was making enemies I couldn't afford to have, that there would be serious consequences for embarrassing people publicly like this. It read like the desperate final act of someone who'd lost complete control and didn't know how else to claw their way back to power. I folded that letter once and dropped it straight into the trash. I didn't need to fight her anymore. The truth was, winning this war all on its own. By New Year's Eve, our family had split completely into 2 separate camps. There were the ones who clung desperately to the old ways, defending my mother, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, dismissing every revelation as unnecessary drama. And then there were the ones who finally opened their eyes to reality. They started organizing their own gatherings, their own traditions, their own version of what family could actually look like. Riley hosted a brunch in January and invited everyone she trusted. Over 20 people showed up to support each other and start fresh. Uncle Derek wasn't invited. Neither was Isabella. Neither was my mother. I've had to grieve in a way I never expected. Not just the loss of a family I never truly had, but also the death of the version of myself that kept hoping for their love and approval. I let that desperate, people-pleasing version of me die. I buried him along with the guilt, the endless need for validation, and the bone-deep ache for acceptance from people who were never going to give it. Now, I'm actually living instead of just surviving. I started writing again for the first time since high school. I launched a small freelance business that's been growing steadily. Riley and I have never been closer, and regularly people reach out to me. People who saw what happened, who recognized their own family dysfunction in my story, who say things like, "Thank you for finally saying something out loud. I felt this way for years, but didn't know how to speak up." So, if you're reading this and thinking about your own family members who mock you, who use your love like a weapon against you, who only call when they need something but disappear when you need support, please listen to me carefully. You don't have to stay in that house just because your name used to be on the mailbox. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep a peace that they never bothered giving you in the first place. Sometimes the bravest thing you can possibly do is stand at that front door they slammed in your face, turn around, and walk away forever without looking back. I didn't lose a family that day. I shed dead weight that was dragging me down, and in the beautiful silence that followed, I finally heard my own voice again, clear, strong, and completely unapologetic.